I would not describe myself as a very fashionable person. In fact, I'm pretty conservative, I think, with my clothing choices. My wife tries to help me in that area, and I'm thankful for that. But something happened to me a few years ago as it relates to my clothing choices that really goes very well with our topic of discussion today about being frugal or being cheap. It used to be when I was in college and even when I was first married, anytime I needed to get a new pair of jeans, I would always just go and find the cheapest pair of jeans that I could, usually at Walmart or someplace like that, 20 bucks, 25 bucks at the most. And I was happy with that. I felt like that was sensible. Until about a few years ago, we were out of town. I needed to get jeans. I don't know if I forgot to pack jeans or what the case was, but I needed new jeans. And so we went to the store, and we went to the store where they actually sell jeans. Like that's their thing. It's a store that you go to, and that's all they have is jeans. And at the time, I was a little bit reluctant to pay about $100 for two pairs of jeans, about $50 each. But very shortly after that decision, I realized, oh, I've been doing this thing wrong my entire life. And what I came to realize is the jeans that I got before, they were just so cheap. Cheap material, they wouldn't last very long, and they weren't great. They weren't like super comfortable, didn't love them. And these other pairs of jeans, it was like the type of jeans that I wanted, fit great, lasted probably 3 times as long. And I came to realize something that day, that sometimes spending more money is actually the smarter financial decision. Now, not always, but in some cases it is. And here's the thing about being frugal, being cheap. I made a short video on Facebook last year talking about the differences, and I wanted to do a podcast episode so I could kind of expand it a little bit more, talk with a little bit more nuance about this issue, because sometimes people use those terms interchangeably. Frugal, cheap. Sometimes people think it means the same thing, or they'll use those words to describe somebody acting like being frugal and being cheap is one and the same, and it's not. In fact, I would argue that they are on different ends of the opposite ends of the spectrum as far as financial decisions. And the weird thing is, somebody who's frugal, somebody who's cheap, the Venn diagram of their financial decisions, there's actually quite a bit of overlap, and I think that's why we get these terms confused. We just think anytime somebody refuses to spend money, that must mean they're cheap, they're frugal. We just kind of stingy. We lump it all under this umbrella of a negative. And what I want to talk today about is what's the difference between being frugal and being cheap, and of course make the case for why frugality is an admirable quality and why being cheap is something you definitely don't want to be. Now, the other thing too is, I've heard people say that they're frugal. They describe themselves as frugal. When I take assessment of their financial decisions and kind of how they live their life, I would say they're not actually frugal. They're really cheap, but they like to use the word frugal because maybe that sounds better, has a little bit better connotation to it. And then I've also, on the flip side, I've seen people getting accused of being cheap when the decisions that they're making are actually frugal decisions. And so we need to understand the difference. And really what it comes down to is there's a very fundamental difference in the why, in what motivates financial decisions that separates out cheap and frugal people. Yeah, they will, many times you'll see them making the same types of decisions, but there's a point at which they diverge pretty sharply from each other. So let's first of all define our terms. Cheap. Somebody who's cheap is someone who wants to save money at all costs, especially, and this is kind of a bonus, especially if it's at the cost of someone else. That's even better for the cheap person. So for instance, they're the kind of person that will go buy an appliance or an electronics, like they'll go buy the TV to watch the Super Bowl, and then they'll return it the next day and say that it doesn't fit their needs or it's defective or whatever. Give some excuse to return it so they get a free rental. And they think that's great. And they kind of pat themselves on the back for their cleverness because it doesn't hurt them, but it hurts the store that now has to take this returned item. But they don't care about that. A cheap person would be the kind of person that takes their kids to the zoo, and because the price for 5 years old and under is less, they'll say that their 7-year-old is 5 so that they can get a slight discount and save themselves a few bucks, right? The cheap person is the kind of person that would put pressure on a family member or on a friend to do work for them for free or for a discount. They'll say, hey, why don't you take my pictures, or why don't you do some work for me on my website, and I'll give you a shout out. You'll get a lot of exposure for your work, and it'll kind of be like an advertisement for you. See, the cheap person, all they care about is saving money, even if it's detrimental to somebody else. If somebody else has to bear the brunt of that decision, that's okay with them. And really, ultimately, what it is it's a self-centered problem. It's a selfishness problem, because the attitude is, as long as I don't have to pay more money out of my pocket, then it doesn't really matter how I do that or who it harms in the process. Have you seen that show, Extreme Cheapskates? I've seen maybe a couple minutes here and there. I've not watched a full episode, and I don't even think that I could if I wanted to. I think it would be too cringy for me to sit through an entire episode. But of course, the name is kind of self-explanatory. What it does is it highlights these people that are extreme in the ways and the lengths that they go to save money. Like, for instance, there's people that will scour the entire town for loose change and go to the grocery store where they get the quarter back for their returning their cart. And they'll do all these things just to gather, less than $10 in change. And they think it's a huge deal. I mean, people do crazy stuff. Like they'll re-dry used paper towels so they can reuse them. They'll unplug all of their electronics before they leave the house so that they don't, use that extra little bit of electricity that is used when you leave something plugged in. Even if it's not on, it's still using some electricity. Just crazy stuff. Things that any rational, sane person is like, why would you go through all that trouble and effort to literally save a few dollars, if not a few cents? And of course, those are extreme examples, hence the name Extreme Cheapskates. And I'm sure if you're listening to this, you haven't been featured on that show. So you may feel like, well, see, I'm not cheap. I don't do that kind of crazy stuff. But being cheap is not those crazy extreme things. It's being somebody who's driven by the bottom line, by price. The kind of person to where all that really matters at the end of the day is not parting with money. Is it saving money at all costs? That's actually not a healthy attitude to have. Just like if you came across somebody who was obsessed with making money and obsessed with becoming wealthy, and just all they thought about is how to make another dollar, you'd say that's not good. Especially as a Christian, we know the Bible has plenty of warnings about the love of money and chasing riches. You say that's not a good attitude to have. But on the flip side, it's also not good to be obsessed and to live your life constantly worried about not parting with any money. That any little dollar would slip out, would leak out of your financial net worth. It's not a comfortable place. It's not a healthy place to be, I should say. So being cheap, trying to save money at all costs. But being frugal means maximizing the value of your money. Somebody who's frugal is concerned with getting the most for their dollar. They're trying to avoid waste. They're trying to avoid extravagance. And really, instead of looking at price as their bottom line, they're looking at value. Is what I'm spending worth what I'm getting? And that's a really subtle but profound change to your paradigm, and a shift that I think a lot of us would do well to have when it comes to how we think about how we spend our money. So for instance, a frugal person is faced with a home repair, and they have a decision to make. How are they going to address this issue? They know that they could probably do it themselves if they took the time. They could go to Home Depot and take a few trips probably to get all the parts that they need and figure out, oh, I forgot this and I have to go back for this. They can watch a bunch of YouTube videos. They can spend their entire Saturday trying to address their issue, and they could probably do it themselves. However, they also know that if they pay a handyman $150 to come over, they'll be able to fix it faster, more efficiently, and it's much more likely to be done right the first time. And so the frugal person probably looks at that and says, you know what? Even though I could do it myself and spend less money, there's more value in having somebody who's an expert, who will take less time, and is much more likely to do it the right way. It's a value proposition instead of just what's going to cost me more money. So a little personal anecdote. I say this because it fits in with the theme of what we're talking about. And secondly, it's just kind of something I was excited about recently, so I want to share the story anyway. Well, our SUV, I have a Nissan Rogue, and we have, of course, like a lot of SUVs now, they have that navigation screen where it has your GPS and all the things right there on the touch screen. Well, that went bad. And I took it to the mechanic, said, hey, can you kind of look, see what happened here? We had the transmission replaced. Maybe that's what caused an issue when they were taking it out. And they said, well, and we don't see anything. You probably should take it to the dealership. They've got the specs on it. They can tell you for sure. So I took it to the Nissan dealership, and they said, well, sure enough, yeah, it's bad. It needs to be replaced. And good news, we can replace it for you, get you a new one, parts, labor, taxes, all in. It's going to be $1,600. To which I just kind of paused and, okay, $1,600. Now, the guy at the Nissan dealership, he was very nice, very helpful. He said, there's somebody else here in town that, can get you probably a used one for about a third of that price. And he gave me the info. And so that was very nice, very helpful of him. They were very kind about it. But $1,600, even $500 for a navigation screen. So sure enough, did a little bit of research, said, okay, what if I try to do this myself? Looked up, found on eBay, you can get used navigation screens for my model of car for about $145. Looked up on YouTube, how do you replace it? Simple enough. Pop out some panels, undo some screws, switch it out. Easy enough. Okay, even somebody who's not mechanically inclined, not a handyman at all, even I could do it. And guess what? I replaced the navigation screen and everything's good to go, and I spent $145. Now, you say, okay, Nate, why did you tell us that story? Well, because I saved money and I was happy about it, so I just wanted to slip that into my podcast. Well, okay, not quite. See, it's a great example of frugal versus cheap doesn't always mean you go with the cheapest solution. A cheap person would say, oh, $145, boom, do that. But what I also try to factor into that is, yeah, it's $145, but what am I giving up in that process, trying to do it myself? Well, there's time for my research. There's time for the installation. There's time for me to actually buy and get this thing shipped in. It wasn't just something where it was apples to apples. There was a time cost to me, but when you compare $145 to $1,600, well, I think it was pretty clear that I made the right decision, right? But just because something is cheaper does not always mean it's the best option, and that's what the frugal person recognizes. Sometimes people are afraid to go to the doctor, or as I am right now, very hesitant to want to go to the dentist because I know there's going to be a bill involved. But the frugal person realizes, hey, there's a cost to not going to the proper medical provider. Because if you're not at your best and you allow a problem to get worse and symptoms to be prolonged, then it'll be even more costly. And in the meantime, it's hindering your effectiveness now. And so, yeah, there may be a deductible. Yeah, there may be a bill at the end of the day. But is it worth it? Is the value of your time, the value of your quality of life, the value of your convenience worth that cost? And if it is, then that's the smart financial decision. So that's really what it fundamentally comes down to. Cheap people only ever see the price. Frugal people see the value. And that's what I would encourage you to recognize in your own life. As you make decisions, make sure that you're looking at value, not just price. Really, as a financial planner, when I zoom out, what I'm trying to help people do is take their capital, take their resources, and help them align it to what's really important. What are your values? What matters to you in life? Is it your kids, your spouse, your church, missions work, your hobbies, travel, fishing, friends what is it? You fill in that blank. What matters to you? What's valuable to you? And then let's look at how you're currently allocating your spending. Are you putting too much of your resources and your time and your effort towards things that really don't matter to you all that much in the grand scheme of things? I mean, I'll say this, there's plenty of things I've spent money on in the past that I regret, and if I could do it over again, I would change. But especially things related to spending time with my family, traveling with my wife, I look at those and I say, that was well worth the money. And I would do that again in a heartbeat. There's certain things that follow the values and the things that really matter to me in life that I don't mind spending money on those areas. And that's what we really want to be doing. So I hope this episode was helpful to you, understanding the difference between being cheap and being frugal. I hope that you'll make that paradigm shift in your own mind and in your own finances. Don't just look at the bottom line, look at where the value is, and you'll be better for it. As always, if you ever have any questions, please let me know. Be happy to answer those. I'm putting these podcasts up on YouTube now, so if you're on YouTube and you subscribe to different channels, I hope you'll subscribe there. You can catch the episodes there as well. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode.